هبت نفحات أنسية فشد البلبل ألف تحية وبدا البدر الليلة شوقا يلقي الأنوار الذهبية هبت نفحات أنسية فشد البلبل ألف تحية وبدا البدر الليلة شوقا يلقي الأنوار الذهبية يلقي الأنوار الذهبية.
If in this month of Ramadan is, trying to build your iman, it is stated that al-iman yazid wa yankus. This is our iman, our faith. It's kind of like go up and go down. So as Muslims, we have to try as much as possible to do things, to engage ourselves in things that is going to help us to become more fearful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to gain piety, to move closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I think that should be the goal.
معنا نهج حياة جئنا تبصرة عن كل ضلال أعددنا بضع رسالات تحمل نورا للأجيال معنا نهج حياة.
Brothers and sisters in Islam, you've seen what just transpired there. Ordinarily, this is how things happen every day in our society. Even in the masjid, sometimes when little children are in the first saf in the masjid, by the time the elders get there, they will move the children to the back. Many a times we complain of injustice, inequality, or even oppression. But we only complain when it doesn't favor us, and that is the reality. When it favors us, we don't complain. For instance, in this scene now, there were a lot of children on the queue waiting to buy bean cake, popularly called akara. But when an elderly person came behind, the woman was trying to wave him to boycott the children and come over to get an express service. And this is what we do every day in our society. The young man was trying to show the woman that no, he is ready to follow the due process. Because justice, equality, and the due process is the ideal thing to do. So wherever we found ourselves, even if it is in the bank queues, in school queues, in ATM queues, or any kind of queue at all, even in the supermarkets, we should be patient enough to wait till our turn. We shouldn't think of using any shortcuts to bypass people to get to our turn. Because it may favor you today, but someday it may not favor you. So, and nothing preaches equality and justice like Islam. Thank you very much.
إن مهمتنا في الدنيا ندعو يلقي الأنوار الذهبية يلقي الأنوار الذهبية يلقي الأنوار.
So basically I will just go on the Islamic rules that prohibits us in terms of zina. So how corrupted our social media is nowadays. Hardly we want strolls through the news feed without the news feed bringing out some kind of content in which Islam has kind of prohibited. But through Islamic virtue that has been inhibited in me currently now, I've been trying to avoid it totally in a way that I've restricted my algorithm in the sense that my social media is now bringing things that are more lawful, that is halal, unlike formerly that it often bring contents which are haram.
وأظلنا شهر السلام ضيف يزور بكل عام فإذا أهل هلاله في الكون ينحسر الظلام في الكون ينحسر الظلام ونفوسنا تهفو له وتهيم فيه فلا تلام أيامه قدسية غيم سقى الدنيا سلام غيم سقى الدنيا سلام وأظلنا شهر السلام ضيف يزور بكل عام فإذا أهل هلاله في الكون ينحسر الظلام في الكون ينحسر الظلام تروي القلوب من الظما والليل يعبق بالقيام والعتق فيه هدية من ربنا حسن الختام من ربنا حسن الختام وأظلنا شهر السلام ضيف يزور بكل عام
يلقي الأنهار الذهبية أهلا 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 المحفل أنتم.
أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما. أيها الأحبة في الله، أحييكم بتحية الإسلامية مباركة طيبا. أقول السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Dear listeners at home, after seeking Allah's refuge from our cursed Satan, who has been condemned to be doomed in the blazing fire of hell, and who is combat ready all the time to seduce human being onto his path of misguidance, we begin in the name of Almighty Allah, the first without beginning and the last without end. We beseech him to continue cascading his choicest peace and blessings upon the gentle soul of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, just as we pray that the same be extended to members of his household, the companions, as well as the generality of the Muslim the world over. Respected listener, we greet you in the best form of greetings, which is compatible with every time and clime, and of course the condition man's life continue to find himself, by saying, may Allah's choicest peace and blessing continue abiding by you and us from now till the end of time. Without wasting time and mincing words, today we are going to discuss a very important topic, Imamship, the unique leadership of Islam. In Islam, just like Sayyidina Umar said, and later by his own son, grandson, Umar bin Abdulaziz, that La Islam illa bi jamaha, wa la jamaha illa bi imara, wa la imara illa bi samwa wa toha. That there cannot be Islam without leadership, without a community of believers. And there cannot be community of believers without leadership. And there cannot be leadership without those who are ready to listen to and obey the leadership. Allah in the Quran chapter 4 verse 59 says, Ati'u Allah wa ati'u Rasulah wa ulul amri minkum wa iza tanazatum fi shay'in faradduhu ila Allahi wa ila Rasul. That obey Allah and obey the apostle of Allah, and those charged with authority among you. And if you differ in anything among yourself, refer it back to Allah and refer it to the apostle of Allah. By this, we are expected to settle all our differences by making research to the Quran and to the Sunnah of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that is just by the way. Now, Imam in Islam, what does it mean? In general sense, it means somebody who is a leader. Arabically, linguistically, it means a leader. But in Islam, we have to go through history. We have to take historiobiographical excursion into the history of the development of Islamic civilization. So when the Prophet was around, he was the leader of the Muslim across the globe. Everywhere we have Muslim, they listen to and obey the Prophet. He gave instruction and it is being obeyed. When the Prophet was no more there, after his demise in 632 CE, a leader who has to take the temporal position of leadership and administrative position of the Ummah has to emerge. And so Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu became the first Khalifa, that is the viceroy or the representative of the Prophet himself sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There can no longer be prophet and there can no longer be revelation. But the revelation that has already been made and has been completed, just like Allah says, Al-yawma akmaltu lakum dinukum wa atmamtu alaykum ni'mati wa raditu lakum Islam adina. That today have I completed my favor of, have I completed your religion for you, and completed my favor upon you. So then it means therefore that it is only leader in temporal matter that is needed. So Abu Bakr emerged, and after him Umar, and after him Uthman, and after him Sayyidina Ali. So these are the rightly guided caliph that we have in Islam. And so after them, even in the time of Umar, he was given an epithet that is different from the normal Khalifa. He became the first to be called Amirul Mu'minun, that is the commander of the faithful, which is another terminology used in leadership among the Muslims. Then after them, there were others who came, and later we now have the Islamic empire being balkanized by the imperialists, and therefore we have the Sultan and later Imams. Imams was used in the Quran to represent leadership. Allah says, Rabbana, hablana min aswajina, wa dhurriyatina qurratan ayun, waj'alna lil muttaqina imama. That, oh Allah, hablana min aswajina, give us among our wives, wa dhurriyatina, and our children, those who are going to be comfort of our eyes, and make us leaders for those who have surrendered themselves to your will. So that is just by the way. Now, leader was equally used to describe Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam, that he was Imam of Muntaqin, those who fear or believe in Almighty Allah. So the position of Imam, therefore, in Islam is very, very unique and very, very important to Islam. Just like the Prophet has mentioned that we should always have a leader among ourselves. Otherwise, if that is not done, Satan will assume the position of authority and give instruction as he wills. And what instruction is Satan going to give other than the one that is going to lead human being astray? Because himself is already astray, and nobody offers what he does not have. It's not possible. You can't offer what you are bereft of. So therefore, and a person to be Imam must be a Muslim, must be matured. He must be matured. He must be sane. He must be of impeccable character. He must be a paragon, a good model or example of what he's teaching others. And he must be physically fit. He must be sane. He must not have a mental problem. So and so on and so forth. These, among other things, are the qualities or characteristics of future to be displayed by somebody who is going to be Imam. In which case, he must have knowledge of the Quran, knowledge of hadith of the Prophet, knowledge of the fiqh, Islamic jurisprudence, and among other things, and must be civilized in his thought. So the best knowledgeable, the best of character, the best who is physically fit and possess the aforementioned qualities are to be Imam among Muslims. So now, in later years, after Islam, the Muslim empire has been balkanized, just like I said, Imam used come to be reduced to the one who is leading prayer. So whereas it is broadly used for leader, but later it was now reduced to somebody who is leading prayer in a particular mosque. So therefore, what therefore are the responsibility of Imam? Don't forget, we said from the Prophet to the Khulafa Rasidun, the four of them, then we have Amir, and from Amir later to Sultan, which Islam France had somehow, and later we now have the Imam. And the last Sultan, which represents Islamic Khilafah, was destroyed in 1924 in Turkey. So it was thereafter we now have Imam representing the microcosm level of the Islamic empire, particularly in their different community and most particularly at their mosque. So it is not only those who lead prayer that are Imam. Leaders of thought, like we have Imam Malik, Imam Safi, Imam Ahmad bin Hanbali, Imam Ghazali, and so many other of them that are leaders of thought. They explain the teaching of Islam to people of their own time. by verbalizing it, by writing it down, and so on and so forth like that. So they are therefore Allah's trustees. Imams are therefore Allah's trustees over Allah's creature. His authority over the servant, his representative in his lands, and the preacher of his cause, and the defender of his sanctuary. So I come again. Imams are Allah's trustees over the creatures, over Allah's creatures, his authority over his servant, his representative on his land, the preacher of his cause, and the defender of his sanctuary. That is what Imams represent.
بدر الليلة شوقا يلقي الأنوار الذهبية هبت نفحات أنسية فشد البلبل ألف تحية وبدا البدر الليلة شوقا يلقي الأنوار الذهبية.
So what function therefore are expected of the Imam? Imam are expected to be counselors, guiding, counseling people about life generally, marital life, about their economic affairs, about their religious affairs, about their political affairs. What does Allah want from them, and what should they avoid in order not to incur the wrath of Almighty Allah? Imams are equally teachers. They teach adults and children about Islam. They teach them, preach to them, and so on and so forth. So therefore, Imam are also preachers. They preach the word of Almighty Allah to their congregation, and so on and so forth. They are equally leaders, administrators. So they lead their community, not only on material side of it, but they must be participatory by preaching to them to lead a righteous life. So sometimes they are expected to pay visits to the sick members of their congregation and their families. They are to take part in interfaith services in the community where they live. The world is turning global, and of course there will be need for Muslim and Muslim leaders, the Muslim clerics, to participate in interfaith activities. They do that as well. They officiate nikah, marriage ceremonies, and all the rest. Then equally, they are seen in arranging educational gatherings in the mosque, teaching people about their religion and how to participate in social activities in the society. Now, Imam are to be followed. They are not to be worshipped. And in Islam, there is civil disobedience. We have said that we have mentioned the features or characteristics to be possessed by an Imam. But in a case there is some errors or there is a deviant one, there is concept of civil disobedience in Islam, because the Prophet says, La ta'atil makluk fi ma'siyatil khaliq. Obedience is not due to a creature of Allah that commands disobedience to Allah. So in which case, if Imam is commanding his follower to do what Allah has forbidden, they should avoid doing that. They cannot obey him in disobeying Allah and disobeying the Prophet. Imam is expected to follow the instruction of Almighty Allah, and so is he expected to equally follow in the footsteps of the Prophet. But whereby he deviates from them, the congregation or members of his community are not expected to follow him. And that's why Allah categorically mentioned what we should expect of our leaders, our Ha'ima. Allah says, Alladina immakanahum fil hardi aqamu salat wa atu zakat wa amru bil ma'ruf wa nahu anil munkar wa lillahi al-akibatu umur. Allah says that those people, those leaders, when we establish them on earth, they keep up prayers, they pay zakat, and they command what is good and forbid what is evil. And verily, indeed, to Allah is the end of all matter. So if this is the case, the leaders, the Ahima, are expected to be good example for their people to follow. This is the unique and very important concept of Imam that we have in Islam. And when the Imam is upright and obeys Allah and obeys the apostle and follow the footsteps of the prophet, it is incumbent upon the members of the community to follow in his footsteps. Otherwise, they will not be able to follow him, because la ta'atil makluk fi ma'siyatil khaliq. Obedience is not due to a creature of Allah that commands disobedience to Allah. And that having been said, it is therefore important that when we want to choose our imam, we should look at the characteristics or features we have mentioned, that the person must be best in terms of knowledge among the members of the community. He must be of impeccable character. He must be physically fit, sane, and must be a Muslim adult that is well known to be of good standing when it comes to the teachings of Islam. Otherwise, he will not be appointed. And of course, like we said, La Islam illa bi jamaha, wa la jamaha illa bi imara, wa la imara illa bi samwa wa toha. The community of Muslims cannot be left alone without leadership, because that quotation says that La Islam illa bi jamaha, there cannot be Islam without a community, and there cannot be a community without leadership, and there cannot be leadership without obedience when necessary. So these are some of the things that are expected of the imam. And of course, again, Allah has mentioned it that we should follow him and follow the prophet and follow the leaders among us. That minkum, amongst you has to be underlined. So anybody that commands disobedience to the teaching of Islam cannot be a leader that is to be obeyed by Muslim. Anybody that commands us to commit sin, so because atamuruna an-nasa bil birri wa tansawna anfusakum wa antum tatluna al-kitaba fala taqilun. Allah has the leaders questions, that, or those who preach, that do you command what is good and you left your soul alone without taking to what you are commanding others to do? Afala taqilun. We have given you book, they do not reason. So we should be guided by the teaching of Islam. One day, he was going around the town and discovered that there was a cry of a baby from a particular house. And he went there. When he met the woman was complaining that our leader, woman, has not been taking care of our welfare. That is why we don't have food to give to the baby. The baby is crying, and we don't have anything to give to the baby. And now said, okay, is that the case? We took care of, pacified the woman, and now said, okay, the matter is going to be looked upon, and of course went and go and brought food for the woman, went and brought the food for the woman, and of course at the end of the day, the woman now thanked him so much. And of course, while he was trying to carry the food to the woman's house, the help was trying to say, okay, let me carry it. He said, on the day of judgment, Allah is not going to hold you responsible. It is me, Allah is going to hold responsible. So I should do what I'm supposed to do. So he equally mentioned that if he failed to make the road on the Euphrates good enough for the horses and camel to pass through, if one camel falls and to suffer any injury, he is going to be the one to account for the loss and for the injury that is inflicted on the camel. That is just camel. How much of human being? In that wise, Islam says nobody should ask for power. Don't ask for power. And if you give power to those, it is not the, when you have better qualified person in the society, that person has of course offended Allah and his apostle and the Ummah. So by giving power to whom it is not due, and the society should be in the sample for that. So in which case, when people ask for power in Islam, it is not given to them. But when the society, members of the society collectively select or elect or appoint anybody as their leader, So Allah will always be there to assist that person to succeed in that position, as the members of society who have given him that responsibility or appointed him will not equally leave him alone. So that is very, very important and germane, and of course we should bear that in mind. So we pray that as you have listened to this, it will be hujjah for the person that is presenting it and for you that are listening to it, and we pray that we witness more and more of Ramadan on the surface of the heart. May Allah count it as a part of our sanat on the day of judgment and grant us long life and prosperity in health and wealth. Wabillahi tawfiq wal hidayah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, Lord of the worlds, we want to say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to you viewers. May Allah grant us the benefit of today's discourse. By Allah's grace, we want to look at the whole issue of poverty that is ravaging our society. Every direction that one turns, one is confronted by the menacing banditry of hunger, poverty. The squalor is tattooed on the faces of people, on the body of people, is everywhere. It does seem that it is the greatest threat to humanity today. Regardless of what our pretenses are, it is gnawing at the equanimity and the fabric of society. And until and unless we find the intrepidity to confront this monster, it is most likely going to ruin us as human beings. The whole issue of poverty tends to raise the issue of our sense of humanity. It tends to query our claim to being human beings who are endowed with compassion and pity. The fact of the matter is that there is absolutely no reason on the surface of the earth why human beings should be hungry. But we are hungry because we have luxated ourselves from the essence of being. We have fractured ourselves from the teachings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which was supposed to give meaning and significance to the life that we live. How does one, for example, explain the fact that the vast majority of humanity today is navigating the heaving ocean of impecuniosity, if not outright penury, in the face of the homogeneous resources that we have? We can honestly not explain this. Less than 10% of the human population have over 90% of the resources of the world coagulated in their hands. And yet there is hunger everywhere. How does one explain this? It is obviously inexplicable. It's the height of fiendishness, it's the height of impishness, it's the height of cruelty that we will cause to coagulate amongst us, very insignificant few, what we obviously do not have need for. That's cruelty. It does not speak of a people who have internalized the principle of humanity. It doesn't matter our protestation to the contrary. The evidences are there dotting the landscape that we are people who have no compassion, who have not appreciated what humanity is. If we have hunger in the land today, in spite of the benevolence of providence, of nature, in spite of the superfluity of resources, how does one explain this if it's not out of outright cruelty? That basically is what we are summoning and inviting our attention to, that this monster will consume all of us, regardless of how secure we may think we are now, if we do not do what is required for us to deal with this menace. Do not forget that the tranquility, the equanimity of the mind of the one who is supposedly opulent is predicated on the relative tranquility and equanimity of the one who does not have. For as long as there are persons who do not have, who are ululating, who are head manacled by inanition, hunger, who have been ravaged by extreme poverty, extreme want of the basic things that they need to survive in life, which is food, the rest of humanity would not know peace. It was basically to address this fundamental issue, the fundamental want of man, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not do a dichotomization of what is spiritual and what is social. It talks about the bipolar unity of all of these issues because they are united. There is an ontological relationship that exists between the two. Take, for example, in virtually all the passages of the Quran, when Allah talks about us praying, for example, He says, "O you believe," when He talks about wa'akimu salat, you establish prayer, it is immediately preceded by wa'atu zakat. The establishment of prayer, for example, talks about what is religious, what is spiritual. It talks about the spiritual dimension of man. But what is spiritual about man, if it is extracted from what is supposedly social, it loses its meaning, it loses its value, it loses its significance. It explains why it has that reinforcing brick that represents that which is social. Because to pray, for example, like we said, represent that which is spiritual. And for you to give act of charity, there is absolutely nothing spiritual about that if you were to observe it more critically. It is to deal with social issues. It is to deal with social issues, which ultimately will translate to your being able to find the requisite ambience for you to practice that which is spiritual. If there is discombobulation, there is confusion, there is riot arising from persons who have found no meaning in existence anymore because they are starving. How do you find the right environment, the right atmosphere for you to say you are engaged in an act of worship? It explains why simultaneously where you find the issue of you pray, develop yourself spiritually, you find the issue that talks about you being solicitous, you being caring for others. And it explains why just like the act of prayer is made compulsory for you to practice act of zakat or charity is equally an obligation. It is not one that leaves you with a choice. What exactly was it intended to deal with? Is to eliminate, to banish hunger in the land. It was not anti-property, for example. It was not anti-productivity, for example. It was to create an environment that was sane, an environment that conduces to the realization of the spiritual dimension of man. Because if some other person were to be hungry, it disrupts the equilibrium of the system in a way that makes it practically impossible for you to begin to say you are engaged in any spiritual exercise. But today, a number of us think that we could become spiritual dynamites without bothering about the fact that someone out there requires to survive within the context of that which is social. The Prophet Islam, in explication of this fact, for example, said, beyond, he says, you are not even a believer, you are not involved in anything that is supposedly spiritual. When you eat to your fill and your neighbor goes to sleep ululating on an empty stomach. So your claim, your protestation of faith is suspect. If you ate to your fill, you have become costive. Your dustbin is rich of waste when your very next door neighbor is held in shackles by hunger, by poverty. Then your wealth becomes superfluous, becomes absolutely meaningless. It does not represent blessing for you anymore because ultimately Allah would interrogate you and deal with you on the basis of a mind that has become so ossified, a mind that has been numb, anesthetized against the feeling for another who does not have. We are not suffering in the world today because there is lack of resources. We are obviously suffering because we have not internalized. And I'll tell you most frankly, only the deen of Islam has placed pari passu and had rewarded the act of dealing with what is social by way of providing for people who do not have as a religious obligation, as an obligation that ranks in the scale of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala values the most. It explains why. The Prophet says, if you were to prepare a meal, for example, 40 houses to your right, 40 houses to your left, all of those who have perceived the aroma of that meal you have prepared are entitled to. They are entitled to. You are not doing them a favor. You are just discharging the obligation that you hold. Come to think about it. How wonderful the world would have been if each one of us was solicitous for the other. What will bring about kidnapping? What will bring about banditry? Because all of these kinds of envy are the issue that the whole idea of you being solicitous for others, which zakat enables us to do, would have dealt with and deals with absolutely.
Malam Sadiq Zakaria Muhammad Obo. Please keep on watching Amana Legacy Foundation in all social platforms, and you will get the best.
How would you, for example, want to hurt the person who provides for you? How do you, for example, want to hurt the person who has not allowed poverty to mortify you, who had not in the least mocked you on the basis of the fact that you do not have, who says you have a right, as it were, a right, not a privilege to that which he has, because it is a religiously imposed obligation that he owes to you. If we were discharging all this, you can begin to appreciate how beautiful it was. Oh, if I had money, for example, that has gotten to what you refer to as the nisab, maybe 1, 2, or 3 million, because you know the naira is fluctuating, is relatively difficult to say what it is. But say you have about 3 million in the bank that has stayed there for 1 solid year. Islam imposes on me an obligation that once I am not indebted, no debt is attached to this money. 2.5% of it must go, not to those I am ordinarily obligated to provide for by way of my children, my wives, and other dependents who are my duty to provide for, but others who are not qualified by any of this attachment, that it becomes theirs. It is to create a blithesome environment, an environment that is surfeited with love, an environment where everybody is happy with the other person. Nobody, there will be obviously no basis. Anyone who becomes envious of the one who provides willingly within the definition of what Islam has said, obviously has a psychiatric case. You know, it's a mental condition that needs to be dealt with. It is not on the basis of what has happened. But like I said, look at the global world. Over 90% of the people you find in the world today are eking out a miserable existence. And all of that is happening in the face of prodigious, homologous resources. How does one explain this? It's obviously inexplicable. You cannot find any explanation for it other than that our hearts have become seared. We have refused to allow Islam to penetrate and for us to be regulated by the principles of Islam. Hunger obviously has no business in the world. Umar ibn Abdulaziz had asked people to go collect zakat, and it was extremely difficult to distribute the zakat. The difficulty arose from the fact that there was nobody who was in need of the zakat. But today we are daily inundated. We are daily inundated with requests. People are obviously hungry. We have persons who are busy hoarding in order to maximize from the hunger of maximize benefit from the hunger of others. How cruel could it have been? For us to appreciate what it is to be hungry, for example, Allah brought fasting, which is something that is compulsory that you do as a Muslim at least once, say 30 or 29 days in every year, except if there are extenuating circumstances that make it impossible for you to participate. So you could be stupendously rich. But once you are observing fast, you are restrained, you are restricted from taking drink, you are restricted from taking food, even when you have them plentifully. That in itself works on your psychic, makes you to appreciate what the pang of hunger is. And that was supposed to produce in you the art of catholicity, the art of generosity towards persons who would observe the fast, no longer as a religious obligation, but because of the diet of resources for them to meet with their hunger. So how can we go through this, internalize this, and we are not able to objectify it within the context of providing for those we are ordinarily better than? These are basic steps. And we have told the world, regardless of what you do, by way of so we will bring palliative, we will give food stamp, we will give food aid. It isn't going to deal with this situation. Because the one you give palliative to, you mortify. It gets humiliated in the course of you saying you are giving palliative. But when you give out zakat, for example, when you do act of charity, for example, the person is honored. The person is honored because in you he sees a feeling of fulfillment. He feels that you are the one doing it a favor for being available to collect what is given. Because obviously the act of practicing a particular thing is only possible when there is an object on which it will be practiced. If the object does not exist, then it becomes an abstract thing. It becomes an abstract thing. That explains why for zakat not to be in the realm of what is abstract, we needed objects on which it should be practiced. So if we have them so plentifully, why are we the way we are? Why are we the way we are? So there is no food, there is no accommodation for a number of persons, not because there are scarcities of homes. Look at the most civilized and advanced societies in the world today. If you took the United States of America, for example, millions of persons are roaming the street looking for food to eat. They are living on the fringes. They have absolutely nothing to eat. Superlative as the story of the United States of America, Canada, whatever will be, there are persons who just don't have food to eat. There are people who are homeless. They have no places to sleep. They can't guarantee where they will pass the night today. And if they got a place to sleep tonight, there is no warranty for them that that same place will be available for them to sleep tomorrow. And yet, that is a country where you have homes that have suffered foreclosure, that if they were to be distributed to the millions of people who have no homes, each one will get 2-3 homes, and there will still be homes looking for those to be given, that they should be given to. It just shows the depth of the wickedness of the soul of man. And it is that soul Islam had intended to deal with. That was basically what it came from. Because what Islam talks about is mental as well as attitudinal transition. It's not to browbeat you. Because the whole act of giving and giving voluntarily, all that which is volitional, arises from a deep appreciation of persuasion. It arises from the capacity, a deeper capacity for one to observe that life will be extremely miserable for you if you cause resources to coagulate around you when the vast majority of those around you do not have. Because the absence of food in the homes of those persons represents a serious threat to your own survival and those of your offspring. And so why would we not begin to internalize, objectify, and give a pragmatic expression to all of what Islam had said for us to deal with the issue of hunger? Because if I am going to be providing for others who do not have, it will temper with the proclivity of wanting to corner everything. It will deal with the issue of greed. It will deal with the issue of hoggishness. It will deal with the issue of covetousness. Because basically, when you find people struggle to get the things they obviously have no need for, what you mirror in that is the absence of the appreciation of the position of Islam on this issue. Why should I, for example, struggle to make all the monies, put them in the bank, not get them involved in any productive end, and only for me to sit down every year racking my brain? Oh, who is that person idling away? 2.5% of my resources is due that person. It's either I give to that person or I get perished. Both words. I get perished when I return to Allah for neglecting an obligation, and in this world because I will not know peace. Tell me how many a rich man you know today who in all honesty will say that he has peace in the true sense of the word, that does not have to look behind his shoulder from time to time as a consequence of the menace that he had helped to consciously or unconsciously created. It explains why we must begin to deal with the issue of food scarcity. Allah again has talked about us being prudent in the management of resources. In copious passage of Quran, say, do not be involved in the devastation of the earth. And so you find some who will hypocritically say, no, we are maximizing the benefit of it. We have been engulfed in what you refer to as conspicuous, unbridled consumption. Trees that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Prophet encouraged us to plant trees. But we are at the forefront wanting to deplete the environment by felling trees just because we want to create ecstasy, we want to create beauty, we want to enjoy clover. These are challenges, these are fundamental problems that threaten our existence. Today, the depletion of the ozone layer is a consequence of the insatiable greed of man, wanting to extract everything. And so the earth is reacting. So we are greedy, we are selfish, we are cruel to others, and we are beginning. It's like someone who stood on the branch of a tree and was beginning to cut that tree. How does that branch fall and you think you continue to stand there? That is what is confronting us today. We are in a society where to eat is a serious problem, and that problem is escalating by the day, because what should have ordinarily gone into what is halal food for us, we are taking into the production of what is not halal. You go to some parts of this country today, particularly the Taraba axis, grains are being bought in their millions of tons by foreigners, and they are taken out of this country. And what are they going to use them for? Some companies that are domesticated here are buying them to produce alcohol. And meanwhile, Islam says, do not go near it. The grains that should have gone into pap that will enrich us, nourish us, goes into the production of alcohol. And when people take this alcohol, they get the Dutch courage, as it were, to practice the most fiendish act, the most impish, the most evil, horrific, whatever. All of those who are into armed robbery, into kidnapping, into assassination, into courtesan, they will need to be high on all of this. And that creates problem for society, even as it deepens the issue of hunger in the land. So you find out that once there is hunger in the land, the first thing that would be out is the capacity for us to relate as human beings. We have mutual suspicion. You are coming to my house, if I have food, I will just think that is the food you are coming to take. And so there will be no love. We must deal with this greed. We must deal with this self-centeredness. We must deal with this me and me alone by making sure that we are concerned about what others feel. There's only one way this can be done. It's by us embracing the teachings of Islam, which explains why your prayer is hanging if you do not give zakat. If you do not give zakat, you are wasting your time when you say you have prayed. It was so significant, so central that Abu Bakr said, even if I were alone and nobody would join me, I will fight anyone who intends or by any way or suggestion wants to miniaturize the import of the whole issue of zakat. It's key, because society will not grow if you don't deal with the social dimension of it. And zakat fits into this squarely. We must, as Muslims, begin to give currency to this. Not what you get, placebos by way of palliative, that do not fundamentally. They don't fundamentally. They don't fundamentally, because what zakat does is to create in man a sense of responsibility, is to wake the mind that is idle, is to galvanize that man into action, is to make the man an active participant within the social, within the context of that which is social. And so we must come to Islam. It's the only way that has fundamentally addressed this without shackling whomever embraces it, without necessarily dehumanizing you. When human beings lost their wrapper of dignity, everything about that man is gone. It can be beastly. Islam enables us to retain our sense of dignity. And we can help to perpetuate this by coming to use Islamic principle to deal with the issue of hunger and poverty in the land. It's a misery that if it's not dealt with, like cancer, it spreads and destroys other healthy cells. So you may be that healthy cell, but your continuous state of healthiness is a consequence of what you deal with that which is predisposed to being cancerous. When we do all of this, we have peace in society. We'll have less of banditry, we'll have less of kidnapping, we'll have less of assassination, we'll have less of even wanting to take what is collectively owned. May Allah guide us to the truth of Al-Islam and enable us to live Islam in order that we find an environment that does not suffocate us, an environment that does not choke us, an environment that has the kind of air that is life-giving, one that is refreshing. Thank you, my brothers and sisters in Allah's deen, and I wish that Allah will make it easy for us to put into practice all that we have said. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
وأظلنا شهر السلام ضيف يزور بكل عام فإذا أهل هلاله في الكون ينحسر الظلام في الكون ينحسر الظلام ونفوسنا تهفو له وتهيم فيه فلا تلام أيامه قدسية غيم سقى الدنيا سلام غيم سقى الدنيا سلام وأظلنا شهر السلام ضيف يزور بكل عام فإذا أهل هلاله في الكون ينحسر الظلام في الكون ينحسر الظلام تروي القلوب من الظما والليل يعبق بالقيام والعتق فيه هدية من ربنا حسن الختام من ربنا حسن الختام وأظلنا شهر السلام ضيف يزور بكل عام الذهبية يلقي الأنوار الذهبية يلقي الأنوار الذهبية.
Honorably, so I would like to appreciate the effort of my parents, my teachers, my mentors, pedagogue, and all of that have impacted positively in my life. So I would just say Jazakallahu Khairan to them.
الذهبية يلقي الأنوار الذهبية يلقي الأنوار الذهبية
أهلا أهلا أهل المحفل أنتم أبهى أنتم أجمل فالأشعار تراقص بشرا وسرى الحب كماء الجدول أهلا أهلا أهل المحفل أنتم أبهى أنتم أجمل فالأشعار تراقص بشرا وسرى الحب كماء الجدول قد شرفتم حفل السمر مثل نجوم